Our next discussant is Dr. Isham Pawan Ahmad, who is an associate professor teaching philosophy and theology at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. He obtained his master's degree at the University of Chicago under the late Professor Fazlur Rahman and his PhD from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. His research interest focuses mainly on questions on epistemology and how it impacts our understanding of the relationship of revelation to reason. This understanding shapes our view of religion and ethical worldview. He has expanded his research to include works on interfaith dialogue, which translated in collaborations in works on global religious understanding and appreciation with recognition and acceptance of global ethics. He has written and presented numerous papers, both locally and internationally. May I invite Dr. Isham to take the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for the very kind introduction. It was a little too elaborate, but Farouk called me like 7 o'clock in the morning and he asked me to accept this invitation. I knew when he started to say the word liberal, beyond liberalism, I don't think even we reached liberalism yet, so that going beyond it would be not a question, actually. So since Professor Asma discussed the issue between revelation and reason in a way, a more elaborate, and she went through all the list of modernists, and also Farouk also went through a list of modernists. But I would like to go focus on Malaysia in a way, and also on actually issues. So let's discuss different issues rather than, you know, this big term, what is modernism or what is liberalism, as understood in Malaysia might be very different from where it's understood somewhere else. We never had this sort of struggle between revelation and reason in a way. But revelation has somehow in Malaysia been understood in a very narrow manner. How did we narrow this? These are religious issues, these are not. So that's become the focus of the discussion. So as we had recently argued whether, as Mustafa Akil had problems when he first came here, so the issue of whether you can even speak, whether there should be freedom of speech became an issue. Whether that's a liberal interpretation or whether you can only say what you're supposed to say. So as can you give me the slides? Thank you. I just like to focus on the recent changes, right? If you look at the bombing of the Saudi bombing in Yemen, did not create the ulama, there was no fuss. Nobody even questioned whether they could do this. A Muslim country bombing to hell another Muslim country, killing 60% civilian casualties. Why were there no fuss? Yet all of a sudden when a Saudi girl went up on stage and hugged an Iraqi singer in Saudi Arabia, all the ulama stood up. So tell me, is it us who make this religion a joke, or is it what happened? How can we, when people die, it seems natural, normal. Even when they're killed by Muslims, it seems normal, no fuss. Yet an issue like this becomes such a religious issue, the other issue did not become a religious issue. So the question is, how did we get here? So how did religion somehow become so narrow? This is no longer an issue. As I said before, I used this slide before actually, so some of you probably heard it. Right? When freedom of, the issue of freedom of speech became a problem in Malaysia, whether people can speak, then we asked the question, this freedom of speech was actually tried to be curtailed by the Prophet himself. When the Quraysh decided that the Prophet was creating chaos, tried to bring new ideas, were actually disorganizing the society by his calling about reinterpretation of the society, they actually tried to crush, they tried to suppress all these ideas. So why are we doing the same thing that was done to the Prophet before? Whether you agree or don't agree with the ideas is not the issue. The issue is that you should be able to decide whether these ideas are right or wrong. So it's not just my idea to speak, my freedom of speech, but your freedom to listen, and therefore be held accountable for what you then decide to follow. But if you don't have the freedom to even listen to different ideas, whether you agree with Farouk or not, that's another story. But you should be able to listen and say whether you agree or not. Right? That's the question. Now we have the precedents before, where the Prophet himself was trying to be suppressed. Of course, even as most of us here are Shafi'is, Shafi'i disagreed with his own teacher, Malik. Had he been suppressed, had Malik just said, suppress Shafi'i, you would not be Shafi'is today. Well, that might not be such a bad thing, but well, that's a different issue. But I mean, the argument was, within the Islamic tradition, there's always been freedom of discussion and debate. Yet today, because of this, the issue has become, how is it we have been narrowing what is religious and what is not? If you remember, when the Prophet first came, he was not, the major issues in the Quran was actually social injustices. It was talking about economic inequalities. A large number of the issues that he was railing against was the social injustices that was happening in society. We are not talking about the faith that we have today. Everybody's talking about how to make correct prayer or not prayer, but they don't discuss whether the inequalities in society, especially the economic inequalities, and how they are affecting our society, which is becoming more and more serious. These were issues that were discussed by the Prophet, and the early verses of the Quran talks about this social inequality. Question like this is, because similar to when Jesus goes and turns over the tables at the synagogue, arguing that these money lenders were ruining the society, people now today don't talk about religion in terms of these social inequalities anymore. What you talk is about trivial issues. The sad thing is that you have changed, like the ulama who did not discuss whether it's right for Saudi Arabia to go and bomb Yemen and kill people all over the place. They are talking about the issue of whether this lady is hugging a singer is such a major issue, and the other issue, or whether women can drive is such a major issue, but the other issues are totally eluded. What happened to us? How is it that we have limited this argument? As I always said, if you look at the Rukun Islam, it talks about zakat. Zakat it's a tax. It's not sadaqah. It's tax. You have to pay zakat. And zakat is supposed to be a redistribution of wealth. It's a major part in the Quran. It keeps talking about this redistribution of wealth, this egalitarian state, the argument that we must educate everyone. The ulama, the task of the ulama is not to become alim and you know nothing, I know everything. It's actually to bring you up. Not to bring me down, but to bring you up. But somehow these seem to be a threat for the ulama. So this failure we have compartmentalized issues. I do realize these issues are actually quite difficult to deal with. Because you have to deal with the government, you have to deal with how societies organize. It's very easy when you start to talk about what sort of dress code you should wear, whether this is right, that is right. These are trivialities. And after all, where people start to see how religion has become insignificant. You can be religious without actually changing any way of your life. Just dress a little bit different, you're fine. Your wealth you don't have to care about your neighbor, you don't have to care about other people. But the meaning of the religion becomes slowly eroded, and we have sort of compartmentalized. So what I learned under Fazl Rahman, Fazl Rahman was somewhat of a socialist in a way. He always talked about poverty as a major issue in the Quran. Besides talking about reinterpreting verses, but he talked about the egalitarian state, the idea of making people equal. They're not the same. Right? Trying to alleviate poverty is a major issue in the Quran, and trying to be inclusivist, not exclusivist. This idea that the ulama knows everything is an exclusivist idea. This is wrong. So next. Sorry, I have it. I forget. As society rebelled against the Prophet's ideas, they tried to silence him. But what we have is that we are doing the same thing by silencing others. So what happened to us, right? So I stand by here, not just my right to speak, but your right to listen, because we will hold you accountable for your actions. If we do not educate you and you have the opportunity to choose, how can God hold you accountable? So the freedom of speech and the freedom to listen is a very important part of the argument of the Quran. Now the ulama have somehow become, they actually have lost confidence in what they teach. Unless they can force you to become good, they can't convince you. They believe they can't convince you. For some reason, they believe they can't convince you. So that's the argument that man is evil, will choose evil, is actually not within the Quranic tradition. The fitrah always argues man is good, and he would choose good. And you would actually see this historically. Traditionally, large majorities would choose the right thing. There are the small ones, small minority would choose the evil. But most men would follow the law. There are a few who don't. But we can't use the exception as the rule. So how do we do this? As I said, Islam rejects the idea of authority, but accepts the authority of ideas. So we need to change people's thinking. But the question is, actually, majority of question is, we never touch about what ideas are actually religious ideas. Our problem is we have narrowed religious ideas to certain rituals without understanding the implications of the rituals. When somebody asks me, do you think my Hajj is accepted by God or not? I said, well, let's see if you change your behavior after you come back from Hajj. If your behavior suddenly has changed a lot, you have been more sympathetic, more concerned, then yes, your Hajj has changed you. So probably God has accepted your Hajj. But if you come back only talking about whether, the joke was this man came to me and said, I went on this $50,000 Hajj. This $50,000 Hajj was exceptional. Why? Because we all had individual ustad would follow us throughout the Hajj. And he would tell us, this slipper is wrong. You must wear like this. And this dress is, this belt, you cannot wear this belt because it's of certain whatever. And he was proud. He said, well, you see, if I had gone for the $10,000 Hajj, I wouldn't have got the true meaning of Hajj, because now I know how to get the Hajj approved. He did not think of the impact of the Hajj after the performance. Whether he would now be more compassionate, whether he would care for his fellow men. The idea of the Hajj was to go and see other people, to realize there are brothers. You have other brothers, and therefore the color of the skin doesn't matter. The amount of money doesn't matter. But yet, even in Hajj, we have found ways and means to find how to differentiate between the rich and the poor. And I understand you have the money, but still. So, of course, the idea of the shura was also very strongly emphasized it is part of the Arab tradition, but it's also emphasized in the Quran. As the Prophet himself was overruled in a number of times. So the famous one is, of course, the war of Uhud, where he wanted to fight inside, but the Sahaba wanted to fight outside. And he said, well, I follow the majority. It's not revelation. No, Uhud. Handak is different. Uhud is where they had won the previous battle, and they got a little cocky. They had won the one. So they wanted to actually go out. So, but what I mean is the whole idea is mutual consultation or shura is always been strong within the Arab tradition and has been strong in the Muslim tradition. However, today, when you create a feudal system, where you create either an intellectual class, a political class, and therefore, why consult anyone else? We know everything. But that's not true. You have to engage in order to elevate everyone. If you do not engage, even when I learn from my students, whether you never know how they think. When they start responding to you, you actually you should start realizing that you can actually learn from anyone. I mean, it's not so the whole idea is this: when the Quran talks about consultation or shura, It talks about trying to build up everyone. The whole community matters. Unless you consult the community, you will never be able to elevate them. If it's always top down, you will never build the top. You will never build the bottom. Right? So it gives respect for human dignity. It's very strange. We talk about a God who created all men, yet we differentiate men. Oh, we because belong to this religion, we are superior, or men are superior to women, or color of the skin. But we all argue that it's God who created all men. Yet, I mean, they talk about schools, that all schools should be integrated. I don't really agree with it. Just because my classmate is a Chinese or an Indian doesn't mean I know him better. But when I have human respect, I respect people, the different ways they live, the different ideas that they have. But as I respect them as human beings with dignity, I will treat them with dignity. I should not. So this whole idea is that we need to inculcate this idea that you cannot say it's the one God that creates everything, and at the same time that you discriminate against all His creation. Now, within the Quran, it talks about action. It doesn't talk so much about belief. Belief must come action. So we judge people on actions, not on beliefs. So when a person behaves in the right manner, acts in the right manner, you accept it. So this idea of coming out now, language of kafir again coming out, I don't understand where it's coming out, but with this newfound freedom, it's a newfound freedom to also criticize beyond control. It's not just, you actually, it's like, I mean, democracy has a lot of good, but it can also bring a lot of bad. It seems all of a sudden people have this newfound freedom, and the language they use, instead of actually being more tolerant or being more compassionate, you actually do the opposite. Where anyone who don't agree with you, suddenly this issue of kafir becomes an issue in Malaysia, especially all of a sudden. Before it was not a problem, now it's a problem. The joke was, I was telling the joke. Jakim, for instance, always criticized past leaders. Now all of a sudden, past leaders are supporting Jakim. So what? I mean, they were curtailed from speaking. They were condemned for many issues. All this. Suddenly, they are the ones that are strongly supporting Jakim. So this is a newfound method. I really don't know what's going on. But all of the ridiculousness that we have gone through, right? So you have whether this. So the argument whether, as I said, there's two forms of Islam. You will find in Malaysia two forms of Islam. One, a very literal interpretation, very selective. It's not just literal, it's very selective. When they talk about Islamic economics, they talk about banking. They don't talk about social reconstruction. They don't even talk about zakat. As I asked a friend of mine, why is there so many conferences on Islamic economics? Why are there so few on zakat? Because after all, the Quran hardly talks about, riba is mentioned at almost in the last part. But zakat is mentioned from the very beginning. It connects the idea of, the early Meccan verses connected the idea of helping the poor to actually faith. Ra'ayta allazi yukazibu bidin is a connection. Woe on the people who pray, but don't help the poor. One makes money, one gives money. I mean, Islamic economics, you can make money. Islamic, on issue of zakat, you have to pay money. So which one do you think they choose? So this selection of what is religious, what is not, has become the issue. So as Farouk talks about liberalism tries to make meaning. Religion must have meaning in human life. If you trivialize the issues, you actually lose a lot of meaning. So when people see religion only as something that you have to follow, and you fail to see how it actually benefits your life, and how it actually gives meaning to life, rather than just this formalities that we have. So this becomes a major problem. So how do we change the issue? The question is, most of you here would be relatively considered liberal, most of you. But the problem is we don't speak to each other. Not just the liberals don't actually are able to influence the society. the majority are still fire and brimstone. They are all talking about Islam. Why do we follow it? Because if not, we go to hell. Not because there is a benefit to it, not because it actually gives meaning to our lives, it's just a fear of hell. In fact, they can't see beyond the literalism itself. So all this emphasis on clothing, whether you are on the tajweed, one convert was telling me, they are so interested on whether how she dresses properly or not, and how learning Islam means learning tajweed, not learning the religion itself. Just making sure you pronounce everything correctly, without understanding meaning and without understanding consequence. So how is it that we have come to this conclusion? So this argument for liberalism, coming back, trying to find meaning in religion, trying to understand why the Quran emphasizes these issues, and trying to find function and meaning is actually a very important thing. So I hope somehow we need to talk or engage with each other. Talking to the converted never works. But engaging with the other is actually very problematic. Let me give you an example here. Sorry. This is a study done on Bid'ah. I accidentally read this, you know. So the early ulama were actually against the idea of steamships, telegraphs, steamships, and certain other things that you take in common today. And the reason why? In an anonymous text, author writes the following: because of these innovations, steamships and telegraph, so modern conveniences, one's soul becomes insolent because the soul is inclined to wicked deeds, and most evil deeds are generally committed for money and valuables. And now, if one wishes to commit the deed in a far city, these steamships will enable you to do it. So he's arguing that, you know, the only reason why you're good is because it's difficult to do bad. So modern conveniences today make you be able to do bad. And then he even further goes to denounce these innovations on the ground that it makes one's soul conceited. Because you now have power in your own hands. So going to even medicine becomes a problem, because now you rely on the doctor and not rely on God. So this whole argument, this is very strange. The way they think, as I said, you don't realize when you talk to the other side, you got to understand how they think. And some of them see it this way. So how do we convince them? When you all think of religion as functional, have meaning in people's lives, have reasoning behind it, yet the other side actually don't see it the same way you do. So how do we engage? That's become a major problem. I mean, even as we look at development in Christianity in America, same thing. Religion is now trivialized to superstition, to miracle healing, to some form of faith healing. It doesn't talk about religion as having the social element, the poverty eradication, or the rationalization. Sadly enough, it seems that the more people, the more irrational you meet, the more what I call mystical religion is, the more religious you think it is. But it's never been the case. So how to come back to bring back this other component? Of course, the ulama becomes very, very reluctant, because as I said, when you start talking about social welfare, social injustices, these deal with governments, these deal with politics, but these are what the Prophet did. Whether it's in the case of Jesus, where he overturned the moneylenders, and then became very much in trouble because of that. Same thing as the Quran talks about social equality and egalitarian state. So I hope, as I said, I wanted to hope to get some answers here, because the question is, how do we engage? Even as we talk about Jakim and other social institutions, engaging with them becomes next to impossible, because you don't think like they do. I mean, sad. I came across this by accident in a way. But then I started like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. They do see, most people, if you look at the preaching in the Friday prayers, it's always been fire and brimstone. You will go to hell. You must do this. It doesn't explain why these are good, how these are good. It's always been, that's it. It's an argument as if when you demystify religion or give it a rational interpretation, it's no longer religious. So, I mean, the challenge, as I see between us, is the discussion on how to actually reinterpret and actually reprioritize what religion is. Religion is not just going to the mosque. It's actually making a social transformation. Thank you very much.